Scott Lucas is professor of American Studies at Clinton Institute of the University of Dublin. Welcome to our program, Professor Lucas.
Oh, thanks for having me back, and thanks to all your great viewers.
US President Donald Trump says that Ukraine can win all territories back, which were taken by Russian side. Do you feel that this is Trump's U-turn on Ukraine, and does this also could mean that Vladimir Putin has overplayed his hand with Trump?
My understanding from my friends in Ukraine is, well, let's see what Trump says tomorrow. Because the starting point is that Donald Trump, he swings like a weather vane. You know, he'll say something on one day, and then depending on his mood, depending on who the last person to speak to him is, he may say something different. He does not have a detailed knowledge of what is happening in Ukraine. He does not have a detailed knowledge of the Russian invasion. But it may be a shift in the American position. So looking not just at Trump, but at the Trump administration officials, because yes, Vladimir Putin has overplayed his hand and has not succeeded in doing so. Maybe I should explain that part first. Look, I think if Vladimir Putin back in February, when he had the direct talks with the Americans, when Ukraine and Europe were sidelined, even after the humiliation of Vladimir Zelensky in the White House on February 28th, I think if Putin had reduced his attacks on Ukraine civilians, stopped with the mass drone and missile attacks, I think if Putin had agreed to the territory he had already seized and said, okay, maybe we should have more of Donetsk, I think he might have gotten that deal. But he didn't. He kept attacking Ukraine civilians. He kept attacking the energy infrastructure. He, of course, kept attacking in the east of Ukraine on the battlefield. And he wouldn't compromise. He wouldn't concede anything because he wants to conquer all of Ukraine, let's be honest. And so that gave Ukraine and Europe the space to get back to the table. And here we are 9 months later. And that's still the position, is that Putin continues to attack in the air and on the ground, but he's not succeeding. He has taken very little territory in eastern Ukraine. He has not succeeded in breaking the will of Ukraine civilians or breaking its energy infrastructure. Ukraine is under pressure, but still it resists. So if Russia hasn't succeeded, where is Donald Trump going to get his peace agreement from? Because Russia can't say, yes, we've won, so we will agree to peace. Now, what does that mean where we are with Trump and with his officials? Okay. The Wall Street Journal is reporting, and I think this is accurate because this was actually my impression. They're reporting from certain U.S. officials that Trump made his statement that Ukraine can win, not just defend itself, but it can win because of briefings from senior U.S. officials. 2 officials were named. The U.S. envoy to Ukraine, a man that I think Ukrainians know well, Keith Kellogg, and the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, who used to be National Security Advisor. And they and others told Trump, this probably includes U.S. intelligence agencies, look, Russia has not advanced that far in the east. So this big offensive they've conducted for months hasn't succeeded this much. And Ukraine may be preparing its own offensive to regain territory. Now, I think that might have gotten garbled because I don't think Ukraine is planning a ground offensive. I think what, in fact, they said is that Ukraine has been counterattacking Russia. And again, your viewers will know well, this string of drone attacks on Russia facilities supporting the invasions, especially oil refineries and gas pipelines. And I think they told Trump, these attacks are succeeding. They are causing great pressure on the Russian economy. Trump always wants to be with a winner. So I think he swung to that, and that's why he made that statement, Ukraine can win, and then went even further because of the wider issue about Russia's drone and fighter jet overflights on countries like Poland and Estonia, that NATO countries can defend themselves and shoot down the drones. Now, I say all of that, but as we started, you have to be cautious with Trump. Why is that? Well, there's two reasons. First is Trump and his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, immediately pulled back, just hours after that Trump statement, and said, well, okay, when it comes to Russian fighter jets, Russian drones, they can be downed if they pose a threat, not just simply if they fly over. And I think more importantly, the second point here is that you had a senior White House official. Now, I think I know who it is, but we'll hold that for a minute. A senior White House official said, Trump said Ukraine can win, not because there's a shift in U.S. policy. He just wants to put pressure on Putin because he's frustrated with Putin. In other words, Russia can still come back and give Trump something to move his position again. So that's a long answer, and I apologize for it, but I've been trying to break all of this down. And what I would say is, I think that Trump, you can't rely on him, but I think that Trump administration officials, or some Trump administration officials, are gradually working with Ukraine and Europe to change the narrative. And by change the narrative, it's not that Ukraine will lose this, but that Ukraine will successfully defend itself. And if Ukraine can do that, then yes, the U.S. military supplies need to go through NATO countries. The U.S. needs to be involved in talking about security guarantees for Ukraine. And yes, the U.S. should be considering more pressure on the Russian economy through tougher sanctions.
Let's cover also the most interesting parts of this big statement of President Trump. Trump said that Russia is a paper tiger, and according to the New York Post, this assessment is based on new U.S. intelligence that shows that Russia has a lot of economic problems. Do you feel that Trump has finally understood that Russia is more losing rather than winning by waging this war against Ukraine, both domestically, militarily, and also economically?
It depends on which officials Trump listens to. If he listens to a Keith Kellogg, if he listens to Mike Waltz, if he listens to the U.S. intelligence services, yes. If he listens to, I suspect, Vice President J.D. Vance, who I don't think is committed to the defense of Ukraine, or if he listens to his hopeless envoy to Russia, Steve Witkoff, maybe no. And what is Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling him? But let's break down that statement, that paper tiger statement, to say, okay, what they may be telling Trump, because what the reality is. Look, you in Ukraine know this. The running, it's not just a joke, it's the reality that Russia has had the world's second most powerful army. It now doesn't even have the most effective army in Europe because Ukraine has showed it that Russia cannot just simply overrun it. So the world's second most powerful military is still struggling after, I think, almost 15 months of attacks now, maybe more, to take one town in Donetsk, to take Pokrovsk. They've only taken 4 towns since May of 2023. In the meantime, Ukraine's counterattacks without using U.S. long-range missiles, because the Americans have not permitted this, without using European long-range missiles, because the U.S. has vetoed this, Ukraine, with its drones, its own drones and its own sabotage operations, has knocked out, at least for now, almost 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity. They have shut down gas pipelines, at least for some periods of time. They have hit petrochemical plants, including one overnight. They have hit railway hubs. And you have a Russian economy which is stalled. GDP growth is close to zero. inflation remains quite high. The inflation rates have been brought down to try to avoid recession, but they're still at around 17, 18%. And so you have a Russian economy that may have stagflation, both inflation and the threat of recession at the same time. And you have a Russia which is having problems fulfilling consumer demands while maintaining, the priority of supporting the military. And that starts with gasoline, the gasoline shortages across the country. There are a number of reasons for those gasoline shortages, but one of them is the Ukrainian strikes. And when Vladimir Putin has to acknowledge those shortages, which he did 2 weeks ago in Vladivostok, although he didn't mention the drones, then it's serious.
Also, it seems like Russia can't stop these Ukrainian attacks deep inside Russia on Russia's oil refining capacity. Ukraine continues to conduct these attacks despite such a so-called big, strong Russia's army and a lot of air defense assets. Don't you think that Trump also has been impressed by the vulnerability of Russia's war machine, by its air defense systems, and also by these fuel shortages across Russia?
I think it wasn't just U.S. officials who told Trump about this. It was Vladimir Zelensky that told Trump about this. I think what's important is, look, we've seen this on a couple of occasions. Remember when Zelensky spoke to Trump one-on-one in the Vatican? And that was a really important meeting to get Trump away from Putin. Remember when Zelensky and the Europeans talked to Trump in the White House 3 days after he met Putin in Alaska? And again, here at the United Nations, when you get 30, 45 minutes, an hour with Trump to speak to him very simply, but very directly about what is happening, you have a chance here. And I think the fundamental here is that you're absolutely right. Russia, which, the S-300, the S-400, maybe the S-500, in terms of their air defense systems. And either the systems are not effective, or I think what's more likely is they just don't have enough of those systems to cover the potential targets. And they're not going to remedy that. I mean, the fact here is that Russia can try to put in more men on the front line. They can try to put more tanks on the front line, which reportedly they are doing by calling up old Soviet tanks this week. But they can't just generate these air defense systems out of thin air. And unlike Ukraine, which I know this has been frustrating, getting air defense systems from partners. Kyiv has faced that difficulty. But where does Russia get its air defense systems from? They're not going to get them from North Korea. They're not going to get them from Iran, because Iran needs Russian air defense systems if they're going to defend themselves against Israel. Where's Russia going to get the air defense systems to cover the gap? So no, I think if you read the signals from Russia, this doesn't mean that the Russian people are going to rise up against Vladimir Putin. But if you read the signals from the leadership, if you read and listen between the lines, they know they have no solution for this. They know that they are going to face shortages of key products to keep the military going, because those Ukrainian attacks are going to continue. And here's the interesting part. We still don't know, at least I don't know, where we are with the Flamingo, which is the Ukraine long-range missile, which is being domestically produced. But if the Flamingo can be used, think about how many more Russian targets can be hit. If US and European missiles can be used, think about what could happen there. Think about the vulnerability of something like the Kerch Bridge, which has been attacked before, as you all know. Think about if it could be hit again, and what that would mean symbolically, as well as significantly, to Russia's supposed superiority in this conflict.
Ukraine has also attacked Russia's oil terminals overnight using maritime drones. What is your take on this, another innovation in this fight against Russia's oil empire? And do you feel that Ukraine has finally revealed Russia's so-called Achilles heel? It's the most vulnerable point.
Well, I think Ukraine has known about this vulnerability for years. I think if you and I think back, I think was the summer of 2023 in Crimea, when they first started hitting targets in Crimea, including the oil refineries and the naval positions. Now, part of those attacks on Crimea weakened Russia's Black Sea fleet. And ask yourself the status of the Black Sea now, compared to where it was in 2022. Russia was shown it was vulnerable there. Well, now that has expanded. The significance of what you just referred to there, I think, about the maritime drones, is it brings more of the refineries, or it widens the threat to the refineries. Because if you talk about Novosibirsk, the major Russian port, in the south of the country, the southwest of the country, which has been hit by Ukraine before. It's been hit by conventional drones. If you can hit it by naval drones as well, that means that shipping is vulnerable, including Russia's military ships. It means that the oil terminals are vulnerable at that port. If you think about the ports on the Baltic Sea up near Leningrad, which have been hit recently, think about the vulnerability to them. Now, that's a further distance to try to hit those ports. But, fact here is that while Ukraine's capabilities on the battlefield have been stretched on the front line, Ukraine has expanded its capabilities at hitting Russia from the air and now from the sea because of something, again, that you probably know in Ukraine, but a lot of people outside Ukraine don't know this, that one of the major developments of this war is that Ukraine was able to maintain, develop, innovate in drone production. Some of that in assistance with European partners in particular, that they were able to develop those drone facilities and protect those drone manufacturing facilities, especially in the west of the country, so that they can try to get this edge, this superiority, where we're not just talking about Russia trying to break Ukraine by attacking its energy infrastructure. It's the other way around. Again, do I think this will break the Kremlin? I don't think it'll break it, but it will constrain its ability to try to maintain its military operations. And if you're thinking, which is my rough assessment, that Vladimir Putin has maybe another 6 months, maybe 12 at the outside, to try to continue this offensive, then this makes it more difficult for him, and it builds up the pressure on him to come to the table and try to accept at least what he occupies rather than trying to grab more.
Let's try to analyze and cover Vladimir Putin's thinking in his secret bunkers. Times recently reported that Putin rules Russia from 3 different bunkers, underground or possible secret bunkers. From your perspective, what does he feel right now? Does he understand that he no longer controls the situation? He cannot handle these drone attacks on Russia's oil refining systems, and don't you feel that he could feel ashamed, humiliated, because Russians have an access to the internet and they see these attacks on Russia's oil refining capacity?
Look, I can only speculate on trying to get inside Vladimir Putin's head. I think there are many of you in Ukraine who have known him or watched him closely for longer than I have, who probably could have a better assessment. But let me venture this. Vladimir Putin, when he launched the full-scale invasion in February 2022, this was to be his legacy. This is a man in his 70s. This is a man who has ruled Russia for 25 years. But he cannot say that Russia is a power to match the United States or China or the European Union. He can't say it's an economic power on that scale. He can't say that he has regained the glory of the Soviet Empire. He can't say that he's had this overwhelming success. I mean, okay, fine. He's got Abkhazia, South Ossetia, but is that your legacy? So what does he do in 2022? His legacy is going to be to make Ukraine part of Greater Russia. That's the way I read it. If you go back and read the July 2021 long essay that he wrote to set this up, that's how I read that. Now, if this is to be your legacy, you can't give up. You can't give up and take just a part of Ukraine and say, oh, well, my legacy is that I got, Donetsk and Luhansk, and I've got Mariupol, but there's still Kyiv that still stands. There's Odessa that still stands. There's Lviv that still stands. And there's a Ukraine which is probably going to be part of the European Union. and at least will be associated with NATO, even if it's not a NATO member. So you have to keep going. You have to keep attacking. Now you might say, well, wait. People would tell Putin, they say, well, look, you just can't achieve this. You just can't. You can't. It's not gonna. We're not going to succeed. We're not going to take all of Ukraine. Let's just take what we have. The number of people who can say that to Ukraine has been sharply reduced. Think about this: that some of his key military commanders, for example, General Surovikin, they're gone. They've been gone for a couple of years now. Who has he got around him? He's got people like General Gerasimov, who, as you know, appeared, a week, 2 weeks ago, with this magic map that showed supposedly all of these areas that Russia had taken. And it was Russian military bloggers and observers said, that's ridiculous. We know that we haven't taken that territory. So you got Gerasimov saying, we're winning. You've got Dmitry Medvedev, who, when he is sober, is saying, I'm sure, yes, great job, Vladimir, because that's what Medvedev has to do to keep his position. He can't say, Mr. Kozak, one of the few Kremlin officials who came out and said, look, we're not going to win this. Where is he now? Sacked. He was given some position, I think in Tartarstan or somewhere, way far away from the Kremlin. There are no longer the advisors around Putin who are going to tell him the reality of what's happening. And, his longest serving advisor, possibly, Mr. Lavrov, what's he doing? He's in New York this week trying to tell all these other delegations, you must side with us. We're wonderful. We're part of the great BRICS geopolitical order. Yeah. And so Putin and Lavrov count on the disinformation, the misinformation, the propaganda to change reality. They will try to change reality by splitting countries, especially European countries, away from Ukraine. I think they have less chance of success now. I have to say, I have my frustrations with European countries. I have my frustrations with the European Union. But I think by and large, they've done well here. And I think even if Donald Trump is unpredictable and chaotic, I don't think the Kremlin succeeds in isolating Ukraine. Instead, I think Russia is isolating itself.
You just mentioned about Dmitry Kozak. According to the Washington Post, he was the only high-rank Kremlin official who opposed Russia's war against Ukraine. It's so surprisingly that he didn't fall from the window and just was sacked by Vladimir Putin. Could this mean that Putin decides to continue his war effort? Because according to Washington Post, Dmitry Kozak was trying to persuade Vladimir Putin to settle this war.
I think that's exactly how I read from the signal. Dmitry Kozak was why he survived. We could speculate on that. I think actually Putin does have some personal loyalties, despite the fact that he's a very, very nasty man. And I think there's enough of a personal bond with Dmitry Kozak that it was like he could tolerate listening to him. And then when it came to the point where he can't, he just disappears into the Russian bureaucracy rather than disappearing him outside a window 5 stories up. But that said, it's like, okay, who's there left then to say to Putin, this is what you face? I think the officials, it's interesting. I think if you really think about the officials who are actually saying we've got issues here, you've got the head of the central bank who has actually said, look, we've got really serious economic issues here. We've got a real tug of war here between interest rates and inflation. That's been going on. You then have the finance minister who is saying, look, if we don't do something, we're going to be in recession. Not that we might not be in recession, we're going to be in recession. You've got the head of Mr. Graf, the head of one of Russia's largest banks, saying the same thing, that recession's on the way. And I think those are the people that can sort of, without directly confronting Putin, you're not going to win it. They can say, look, we've got a difficult situation here. And the interesting thing about this is, who's the defense minister? It's Mr. Belousov, who is an economist. Now, I have not heard much from him lately, so I'm going to benefit from your viewers out there. But if the defense minister comes out wearing his economist hat and says, we've got problems with maintaining this war at this level, that's when the pressure grows on Putin. But at this point, the public projection of the Kremlin still is, we've got the gasoline shortages, we've got economic issues, but we can deal with these. We can still deal with these and maintain the special military operation. So I think we go into the winter. We go into the winter when I think it's more difficult for offensives to advance. And we say, how much serious does the damage become in the Russian economy? How much more damage can the Ukrainian attacks inflict? And does that start to open up just the possibility that Putin realizes he's not going to win?
You just mentioned about the next steps of Ukraine. It's really interesting opinion. If Ukraine continues this attacks on Russia's oil refining capacity, for how long can Vladimir Putin sustain this? If Ukraine damages not 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity, but 30-40% of that, what could this mean for Vladimir Putin's war machine if Ukraine continues to conduct and would be able to conduct such successful drone strikes directly on this largest oil refineries?
I think I would take that in two parts. I think the part which is inside Russia is, and this is my reading, and it's my reading from history and so on, and that is that Russian culture, indeed Soviet culture before that, a lot of it is bound around the idea of leaders saying, you have to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice for the good of the motherland. You have to sacrifice for the good of, in this case, the special military operation. And you have to realize also that some Russian people have economically benefited from this. I mean, people who had very little money, but who could go into the military, they risk their lives, but if they survive, they see more money than they have ever seen. So I think that idea of continuing the sacrifice while some people still benefiting from the military machine, it means that everything doesn't fall apart inside Russia, right? But the second part of it is inside Ukraine. I think what it means is that the Russian capacity to try to win is more and more constrained. And so I think Putin is in the position where he stays in power, and the Russian people still accept his authoritarian rule. But he has to consider the idea, first of all, of selling to himself that he accepts only part of Ukraine. And I do, with respect to your viewers and the great viewers, I do think in the short term, you're not going to militarily remove Russia from the east and parts of the south, as well as Crimea. I think Putin may think, well, maybe I just accept what I have now. And I think there may be those around Putin who reappear. We talked about Mr. Kozak, who say, look, let's just accept what we have right now. I think that's what happens. That's what opens up if the Ukrainian attacks continue to hit the economy via the oil refineries, if they continue to hit the military via the oil refineries and the gas pipelines, for example. Can Ukraine go farther? Can it actually, as it cause further economic damage, fundamental damage to the Russian economy? I think that's a question that hinges not only on the drones, it hinges on how much missile capacity they have and how much they're allowed to use.
Also, you just mentioned about Putin's war. CNN recently reported that this war is Putin's existential war. And this analysis suggests that after it ends, Putin likely loses power or faces impossible job of explaining and healing that even his autocracy will struggle with, because he needs to present so-called victory to his people and soldiers, mothers, and veterans, so conclusive that they can be mollified in grief, or Putin must have this conflict to continue as long as he rules, according to CNN. What is your take on this analysis?
I would never make a prediction that Vladimir Putin is going to fall from power. I don't like making predictions anyway, but especially I wouldn't make that one, because he is smart. He is smart. He is ruthless. He is vicious. He took out the biggest threat to his power a couple of years ago with Mr. Prigozhin. First, remember, by making a deal with Prigozhin, allowing him to survive for a while, and then killing him. So it's going to take an awful lot for anybody to overthrow Putin, and certainly he's not going to be removed by elections. I think the way that I could see it being sold is that at the point when Russia can no longer maintain the invasion, and it possibly has to accept a settlement, I think it's presented to the people of, okay, we have liberated, part of Donetsk, we've liberated Luhansk, we've liberated Mariupol, even though they've destroyed it. And one day we will be successful beyond this. One day we will. And I think Russia will continue its hybrid warfare, something that perhaps we could talk about on another occasion, because realize that even as Russia's facing all these difficulties, these pressures, that hybrid warfare, which is economic sabotage, which is the attempt to cause explosions, not only in neighboring countries, but across Europe, that attempt to subvert countries through bribery, through misinformation, disinformation, through the finance of opposition parties and instigating protests, something that we're seeing in Moldova in what is a critical week for Moldova with its parliamentary elections. I think that continues. And indeed, I think if you're really watching carefully, what you're seeing Ukraine and Europe talking about is not only how you defend Ukraine if Putin settles, but then says, I can get more later. I think you see NATO and Ukraine talking about how do you defend the Baltic states? How do you defend Poland? How do you defend Romania from these types of threats? Because we know Putin won't quit. And at the same time, if Putin won't quit, either in terms of trying to conquer Ukraine, he's not going to quit power at home. So I think my answer here is, rather than just waiting for Putin to fall or hoping he'll fall, you just simply prepare for the idea that he will be there next year, the year after that, the year after that, and you maintain your defense accordingly.
And my last question for you, why is Vladimir Putin so reckless to conduct this hybrid war against NATO, these attacks, these violations of airspace, even though his own country is on fire right now? His oil refineries are burning on fire.
I'll preface that with another question, which I genuinely don't know the answer to, because remember that we spoke of, earlier, we talked about Putin could have had a deal with the Americans this spring. He could have had it, and he kind of threw it away by keeping and attacking Russia's Ukraine civilians. Why do that? Why? That's not, he's a smart guy. Why do that? And it's like, he thought, okay, I'm just going to break Ukraine. I'm going to break the civilian will to resist, and I'll get in even better. I'll get even more of Ukraine because of that. And so, as smart as he is, he underestimated the Ukrainian people. And he underestimated the Zelensky government as well. Well, I think the same thing's happening now on a broader scale. And that is, he's thinking, okay, look, they won't give me my deal. They won't give me the rest of Donetsk, right? They won't give me the opportunity maybe later that I can go and get Odessa, go and get Kyiv. Well, I'm just going to cause problems for them. I'm just going to test them, right? Because remember, this is a man who got away with it in the past, or almost got away with it in the past. This goes back to 2007 with the cyber attacks on the Baltic states. This goes back to 2008 with the war with Georgia. This goes back to 2014 when he seized Crimea. So he says, how much can I get away with by testing them with the drones and the fighter jets, as well as the sabotage operations, as well as the bribery? And I think he's miscalculated again, because I think he's underestimated NATO and he's underestimated the member states. I know he's underestimated Poland, because I talked to Polish TV quite a bit, and I know their responses. They're not going to stand for this. I think he's underestimated Romania, and I know he's underestimated the Baltic states. So what I think Vladimir Putin has done is he's actually energized NATO. He's actually energized NATO. He shook them out of their sleep by invading Ukraine and then expanding this. Why did he do it? If he's going to do that, he has an arrogance that he thinks he can bully the other side into submission. He thinks at the end of the day, they will submit. He cannot accept the idea that the other side will say no. So what does the other side do? It has to keep saying no.
Thank you, Professor Lucas, for your time and for your insightful answers. This was really insightful and in-depth interview. Thanks for your time, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine.
Героям
Thank you
слава.
so much.
Thank you very much.